The morning they put her bags on the porch, Lena Graves was 17 years old and wearing the same hoodie she had slept in for 3 nights running. Her stepfather, Dennis, did not come outside. He sent her mother to do it, which was the kind of thing Dennis always did, standing behind decisions he had already made, letting other people carry them to the door. Her mother stood on the top step with her arms crossed over her chest, not against the cold, but against herself, the way a person holds their own body when they have decided not to feel something. "You can call from wherever you end up," her mother said. Lena looked at her for a long moment. She was thinking about the year she had spent watching her mother choose Dennis, then choose him again, then again after that, each choice arriving with a different explanation that added up to the same result. She was thinking about the afternoon she had come home from school and found her bedroom door replaced with a storage room lock. She was thinking about the fact that her mother had not said where she was supposed to go. She picked up the 2 bags. She walked to the end of the driveway. She did not look back. She was 17. She had $42 and a phone with a cracked screen and the address of her grandfather's property written on a folded piece of notebook paper she kept in the inside pocket of her hoodie, because it was the one thing she owned that felt like something permanent. Her grandfather, Raymond Graves, had died 6 weeks earlier. He was the kind of man who had lived so quietly that the town of Harwick, Tennessee, barely registered his absence. A retired mechanic who kept to himself on 2 acres at the end of a gravel road, who grew tomatoes in the summers and listened to the radio in the evenings and said what he meant with the economy of someone who had learned long ago that most words were unnecessary. He had been the one constant in Lena's life, the person she called when things at home got bad, the person who answered on the second ring and said, "Come over," and meant it. He had died of a heart attack in early October, alone in his kitchen, a cup of tea half-made on the counter beside him. Lena had cried for 4 days and then put the grief somewhere deep and covered it over because there was no space in her current life to be broken. At the reading of the will, which had taken place in the office of a lawyer named Mr. Aldridge, who had the careful energy of someone perpetually braced for conflict, Raymond's estate had been divided in the way families divide things when the person who held them together is gone. Her Aunt Linda had received the savings, such as it was. Her Uncle Craig had received the truck. Her mother had received the personal property, the furniture, the tools in the shed, the radio. To Lena, Raymond had left the property itself, the house, the land, and the barn. Her Uncle Craig had laughed first. It was not a mean laugh, exactly, more the laugh of a man who had already calculated the outcome and found it mildly absurd. "The barn alone is going to cost more to tear down than the whole thing is worth," he said, clicking his pen against the arm of his chair. Her Aunt Linda had not laughed. She had done something worse. She had looked at Lena with a warm, practiced sympathy that meant she had already filed the bequest under the category of things that happen to people who do not know better. "You can sign it over," her Aunt Linda said, after the lawyer had finished. "We could take it off your hands. Handle the demolition, clear the land. You would not have to deal with any of it." Lena was 16 at the time of the reading. She had sat in the chair beside her mother and held the key that Mr. Aldridge had slid across the desk toward her, an old key, iron, heavy, the kind that belonged to a door built before anyone thought about making things easy, and she had not said anything. She had closed her fingers around it and felt its weight and thought about the last time she had seen her grandfather sitting on his back porch in September, 2 weeks before he died, looking out at the barn the way people look at things they have not finished deciding about. She had asked him once what was in there. He had been quiet for a long time before he answered. "Things that matter," he said, "to the right person." She had not known then what he meant. She was starting to understand now. The gravel road that led to her grandfather's property was 3 miles from the nearest bus stop, and Lena walked it in the November cold with a bag on each shoulder, her breath making small clouds in the gray morning air. The property sat at the end of the road behind a stand of old cedar trees that Raymond had never trimmed because he liked the privacy they gave him. She came through them and stood at the edge of the yard and looked at what she had inherited. The house was a small, clapboard structure, 2 rooms and a kitchen, the kind of place that had been built to be functional rather than beautiful. It was not in bad shape. Raymond had been a mechanic. He fixed things. The porch boards were solid. The roof was intact. The windows were whole. The house would hold against the weather. She had known this was possible because Raymond did not let things fall apart. The barn was something else. It sat at the back of the property, 30 yards from the house, and it was larger than she had remembered from childhood. Long and low, built from old timber that had gone the color of storm clouds over the decades. One side of the front door had dropped on its hinge and leaned inward at an angle, and the whole structure had the particular quality of something that had been holding a position for a very long time and was not sure how much longer it intended to keep at it. A chain ran through the handles of the doors, secured with a padlock that was the same dark iron as the key in her pocket. She stood in front of it for a long moment. The cedar trees moved in the wind behind her. A crow called from somewhere in the field beyond the barn. She reached into her hoodie pocket, felt the key, and did not take it out yet. She went to the house first. She needed to understand what she had before she opened what she did not. The house was cold, but not damaged. The water was off, but the pipes had not burst. There was a wood stove in the main room and a cord of split wood stacked under a lean-to at the side of the house, enough to last a season. In the kitchen, the cabinets held canned goods, a row of them lined up with Raymond's particular orderliness: beans, tomatoes, peaches, corn, as though he had known someone was coming and wanted them to find provisions. She stood in front of those cans for a long time. It felt like a message. It felt like something left on purpose. She set her bags down. She turned on the wood stove with wood from the lean-to, the fire catching on the third try because her hands were cold and she could not get the kindling position right on the first two attempts. She sat on the floor in front of the stove until the room began to warm. Then she took out her phone and called Mr. Aldridge. He answered on the first ring. When she told him where she was, there was a pause. She was 16 at the time of the reading. She was 17 now. She had been put out of her mother's house with 2 bags and $42 and had walked 3 miles down a gravel road to a property she legally owned, and she was calling to ask if that was something she was allowed to do. Stay there. It is your property, Mr. Aldridge said, with a careful deliberateness that she would remember later. You have every right to be there. And Miss Graves, I want you to know that your grandfather was very specific about his intentions. He was specific in ways I did not fully understand at the time. I think I am beginning to understand them now. She asked what he meant. Open the barn, he said. When you are ready. Open the barn and come see me after. She stayed in the house that night with the wood stove running and ate beans from a can warmed on the burner and slept on the floor with her coat over her because there were no blankets and the sleeping bag in her smaller bag was the thin kind meant for summer camping. She slept better than she had in months. The house was quiet in a way that felt chosen, not empty. Outside, the wind moved through the cedars and the cold pressed against the windows, and she lay in the dark and thought about her grandfather sitting on the back porch in September, looking at the barn the way people look at things they have not finished deciding about. If this story is already pulling at something in you, hit the like button and subscribe to Left Behind, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. She had almost nothing left. No one knew what was waiting. Keep watching. She waited one more day before she opened the barn. She needed to be ready, and she needed to understand why she needed to be ready, which took some sitting with. She spent the day clearing the house. There were no blankets, but there were old curtains she could use as layers. There was a pot she could boil water in. She found a notebook in a kitchen drawer and a pen that still worked, and she made a list of what she needed, and then a list of what she had, and then she sat looking at both lists for a long time, because the second list was shorter and the first was not something she could address quickly, and she needed to stay practical, because practical was what she had. On the second evening, as the light was going flat and gray behind the barn, she put on every layer she owned and walked across the frozen yard and stood in front of the doors. She took the key out of her pocket. The padlock was stiff with cold and rust, and she worked the key for 30 seconds before it turned, the mechanism giving with a sound like something long held finally releasing. She unwound the chain from the handles. She pulled the left door open by hand, lifting slightly as she pulled because of the dropped hinge. The smell came first. Not decay, not rot, something else. Oil and old wood and something dry and mineral underneath, like stone or clay. A smell that made her think of the inside of Raymond's garage, of the back room where he kept the tools he used for delicate work. The smell of something maintained and tended and kept. She turned on her phone flashlight. The barn was not empty. She had expected empty or close to it. Old equipment, maybe the kind of rural accumulation that made her Uncle Craig think of demolition costs. What she found instead was neither of those things. The barn was a workshop. Raymond had built it out over years, quietly, without telling anyone. The structure ran 30 feet deep. In the first two-thirds of that space, he had laid a concrete floor, poured and smoothed in sections, and built along three walls a series of heavy wooden workbenches fitted with metal vices, their surfaces worn smooth from long use. The tools hung on pegboards above the benches, organized with Raymond's particular precision. Wrenches graduated by size, screwdrivers in rows, specialty tools she could not name hanging in their designated outlines on the board as though they had been placed there by someone who knew they would be needed again. She moved the flashlight slowly. She was taking inventory the way Raymond had taught her to take inventory, systematically, without assumptions, looking at what was actually there before deciding what it meant. At the far end of the barn, behind the workbenches, separated from the main space by a low wooden partition, was something she had not expected. Not tools, not equipment, cars. 3 of them, covered with canvas tarps that had gone gray and stiff with years of cold and dust. They sat in a row on the concrete floor, side by side, in the dark, waiting. Lena stood very still for a moment. The wind pushed at the barn wall. Something small moved in the rafters above her. She walked forward slowly, her footsteps loud on the concrete, and stood in front of the nearest car. She reached out and took the edge of the tarp in both hands. She pulled it back. The car underneath was a 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback, dark green, the color of deep water or old glass. It sat on the concrete floor with the particular stillness of something that has been waiting so long it has forgotten what movement feels like. The chrome on the grille had gone dull, but was intact. The body panels were straight, no visible rust on the quarter panels or the rocker rails, and the glass, all 4 pieces, was whole and uncrazed. Lena stood in front of it for a long time. She knew cars. Raymond had made sure of that. From the time she was 9 years old, she had spent Saturday afternoons in his garage watching him work, handing him tools when he asked, learning the names of things before she learned their purposes. He had taught her to read an engine the way other people's grandparents taught them to read books, patiently, from the beginning, without skipping steps. She pulled the tarps from the other 2. The second was a 1969 Chevrolet Camaro, black, a Z28 by the badges, its hood slightly askew, where someone had propped it and then lowered it without fully securing the latch. The interior was original. She could see through the window, bucket seats in black vinyl, the dash intact, the steering wheel wearing a thin layer of dust. The third car was older than the other 2. A 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, two-tone, white over turquoise, with a long sweep of fins that made cars from that decade look like they were moving even when they were standing still. Its chrome was the best preserved of the 3, catching the flashlight in long, bright lines. She stood in the center of that space and looked at what her grandfather had spent years quietly acquiring, quietly tending, and quietly deciding not to tell anyone about. She understood now what he had said on the porch in September. Things that matter. To the right person. She found his logbooks the next morning, 3 composition notebooks stacked in a drawer beneath the main workbench, held together with a rubber band. Raymond's handwriting was small and precise, the handwriting of a man who had spent decades writing in tight spaces, on work orders, on parts lists, on the folded diagrams he kept in his shirt pocket when he was working a complicated job. Each notebook covered a different car. The Mustang had been purchased in 1987 from an estate sale in Cookeville for $900. The Camaro in 1993 from a man in Murfreesboro who needed money quickly and had not done his research. The Bel Air in 2001 from a widow in Clarksville who had found it in her late husband's storage unit and wanted it gone before the next billing cycle. He had documented everything. Every part he had sourced, every repair he had made or planned to make, every hour he had spent on each car. He had tracked the market values over time, noted them in the margins in pencil with dates beside them. The most recent pencil note in the Mustang's book was dated 14 months before his death. Lena sat on a stool at the workbench and read that figure twice. Then she read the figures beside the Camaro and the Bel Air. She sat very still. The cold of the barn was sitting inside her coat now, working through the layers, but she did not move. She read the notebooks from the beginning of each one, carefully, because Raymond had taught her that careful reading was the same skill as careful looking. You did not skip anything. You did not assume you already understood. You stayed with the material until it had said everything it had to say. By the time she finished the third notebook, the light had shifted. Late afternoon was coming through the gap in the barn door in a long, narrow stripe across the concrete floor. She put the notebooks back in the drawer. She stood up, walked to the Mustang, and put her hand flat on the hood. The metal was cold under her palm and solid and real. She called Mr. Aldridge from the driveway. He answered on the first ring again. She told him what she had found. There was a silence on the line that she recognized as the silence of a man who had been waiting to hear those words and was now choosing what to say next with care. "Your grandfather came to see me 18 months ago," Mr. Aldridge said. "He told me about the cars. He told me what he thought they were worth and what he thought they would be worth in 10 years. He asked me to make sure the bequest was structured so that no one could take the property from you before you had a chance to understand what was in it." He paused. "He also asked me to give you something when you called. I was not sure you would call. I'm glad you did." She drove to Mr. Aldridge's office the next morning in Raymond's truck, which she had found in the garage beside the house with the keys on a hook by the door, a half tank of gas, and a note on the dashboard in Raymond's handwriting that said only, "For getting where you need to go." Mr. Aldridge was a compact man in his late 60s with reading glasses and the particular stillness of someone who had learned through long practice to say only what needed saying. He had known Raymond for 22 years. He had drafted every document Raymond had ever signed. He handed her an envelope across the desk without preamble. Inside was a letter, for pages, front and back, in Raymond's small, precise handwriting. She read it there in the office, in the chair across from Mr. Aldridge's desk, while he waited without speaking. The letter began, "Lena, if you are reading this, then the thing I was afraid might happen has happened, and you have found your way to the property without anyone helping you get there. I am sorry for what that cost you. I hope the barn is still standing. I hope you found the notebooks." He explained everything. He had started buying the cars in 1987, the year Lena's mother had married Dennis, because he had understood something about Dennis early and had calculated, with the quiet precision of a man who fixed things for a living, what the future was likely to hold. He had not told anyone about the cars because he had learned, over a long life, that the things that matter most are best protected by silence. He had not told Lena's mother because her mother would have told Dennis. He had not told his son Craig because Craig would have sold them immediately for whatever the first buyer offered. He had told no one. He had kept them for her. The letter described each car and what it needed to reach full restoration value. He had done most of the mechanical work himself. The Mustang needed a carburetor rebuild and a brake line replacement. The Camaro was the most complete. It could be sold as is, he wrote, if she needed money quickly. The Bel Air needed the most work, but had the highest ceiling if it was done correctly. He had left her the tools to do it. He had left her the knowledge to do it. He had spent 20 years of Saturday afternoons teaching her, patiently, from the beginning, without skipping steps. The last paragraph of the letter was short. It said, "I do not know what condition you are in when you read this. I hope it is not as bad as I feared. Whatever it is, you can handle it. You have always been able to handle more than anyone gave you credit for, including yourself. The cars are worth something. The property is worth something. But the most important thing I am leaving you is this. I believed in you when no one else was paying attention. I need you to carry that with you now that I cannot say it anymore. If this story has found its way to you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Left Behind. Your support is what keeps these stories coming, and there are so many more waiting to be told." Lena folded the letter. She put it back in the envelope. She sat in the chair across from Mr. Aldridge and looked at the window behind his desk, at the gray November sky beyond it, at a crow crossing from one side of the frame to the other and disappearing. "What do I do first?" she asked. She was not asking about the cars. She was asking about all of it, the property, the situation, the fact that she was 17 and alone and in possession of something significant that she did not yet fully know how to protect. Mr. Aldridge removed his glasses. He cleaned them once with the cloth from his breast pocket. He put them back on and looked at her with the expression of a man who had been waiting to be asked exactly this question. "First," he said, "we make sure no one can take it from you." The legal situation was more complicated than Lena had anticipated and simpler than her family had hoped. Mr. Aldridge explained it over the course of 2 hours, speaking in the measured cadence of a man who had seen families come apart over property before and had learned that the most useful thing he could do was lay the facts out clearly and let the people who needed to act decide what to do with them. Raymond had been thorough. The will was unambiguous. The property transfer had been structured to pass directly to Lena regardless of her age, with a provision that appointed Mr. Aldridge himself as her legal representative until she reached 18, which was 7 months away. There was no gap for anyone to climb through. What Raymond had not been able to prevent entirely was the noise. Her Uncle Craig called 4 days after she had moved into the property. He had heard from her mother, who had heard from her Aunt Linda, who had apparently spoken to someone in town who had seen Lena's truck at Mr. Aldridge's office. The information had traveled the way information travels in small towns, not all at once, but in a current, finding its level, arriving where it needed to arrive. "That property needs to be dealt with professionally," Craig said. His voice had the specific texture of a man who had already made a decision and was explaining it rather than proposing it. "You are a minor living alone on an unimproved rural property. That is a liability situation. There are people who will want to help you manage this correctly." Lena was standing in the barn when he called, the phone against her ear, her other hand resting on the hood of the Bel Air. "I have someone helping me manage it," she said. "Mr. Aldridge." A pause. "Aldridge is an estate lawyer. He is not equipped to handle the practical side of a property like this." "What practical side are you thinking about?" Another pause, longer this time. "The barn alone. The barn is fine," she said. "I appreciate you calling." She ended the call and stood in the quiet of the barn for a moment, listening to the wind work at the roof. Then she picked up the nearest composition notebook and went back to reading. Her Aunt Linda came in person a week later, unannounced, driving up the gravel road in a white SUV that was too clean for the weather. She knocked on the door of the house and stood on the porch with an expression that had been assembled carefully, piece by piece, into something that resembled concern. Lena opened the door and stood in the doorway, without inviting her in, the way she had learned from watching adults manage doorways her whole life. The ones who held the frame controlled the conversation. "I want to make sure you are all right," Linda said. "I'm all right," Lena said. Linda looked past her into the house. Her eyes moved in the specific way of someone conducting an assessment while pretending to make conversation. "It must be cold out here." "The heating situation, the wood stove works well," Lena said. Raymond kept a full cord. Linda's expression shifted slightly, the concern layer thinning to reveal something more calculating underneath. Not malicious exactly, but unguarded in the way people become unguarded when they realize they are not getting what they came for. "Lena, the sensible thing would be to let us help you liquidate the property. You would have real money, a fresh start. You could go anywhere." Lena looked at her for a long moment. She thought about the letter in Raymond's handwriting, folded in the envelope on the kitchen table. She thought about 20 years of Saturday afternoons and the weight of the key in her hoodie pocket and the 3 cars standing in the barn behind her in the dark. "I'm already going somewhere," she said. "I appreciate you driving out." She closed the door. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with Raymond's notebooks and her own notebook beside them and made a plan. She was 17 and alone, and it was November in rural Tennessee, and she had $42 and a truck with a half tank of gas and 3 classic cars and a property she legally owned. She could not do everything at once. She needed to figure out what to do in what order. She wrote it down. Raymond had always said that the difference between a problem and a project was whether you had written down the steps. The Camaro first. Raymond had said in the letter, the Camaro was the most complete, could be sold as if she needed money quickly. She didn't need money quickly. She needed money for food and utilities and the property taxes that would come due in the spring, and she needed it before she needed anything else. She spent 3 days going over the Camaro with the thoroughness Raymond had taught her. She checked the engine, the transmission, the brake system, the suspension. She documented what she found in her own notebook in the same format Raymond had used in his part, condition, action required, estimated time. The mechanical assessment confirmed what the logbooks had said. The Camaro was close. It needed a tune-up, fresh fluids, and the carb cleaned. She could do all of that. She had done all of that before, under Raymond's instruction, in the garage on Saturday afternoons. She worked in the barn every day. She wore 3 layers and a hat, and she worked until her hands were too cold to feel the tools, and then she went inside and warmed them by the wood stove and ate whatever she had and went back out. The days were short and the light was thin and the cold was the particular quality of Tennessee November cold. Not brutal, but persistent, the kind that outlasts you if you let it. She did not let it. She got the Camaro running on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after she had moved onto the property. She turned the key and the engine caught on the second try, rough at first, then smoothing out into the deep idle of a healthy V8 that had been well maintained and was now being asked to wake up. The sound filled the barn and rolled out through the open doors into the yard, and she sat in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel and felt something she had not expected. Not triumph, not relief, but the specific quiet satisfaction of a person who has done a thing correctly. She drove it up the gravel road and back. Then she drove it to the end of the county road and turned around. The car tracked straight and stopped clean and pulled smoothly through every gear. She drove back to the barn and pulled the canvas cover back over it and went inside to call Mr. Aldridge. He had connections in the classic car community. He had made them over years of estate work, handling the collections of men like Raymond who had spent their lives quietly acquiring things that other people overlooked. He called her back the next morning with a name and a number. A collector in Nashville, a man named Franklin Brace who was known for buying honestly and not wasting people's time. Franklin Brace drove out the following Saturday in a pickup truck that told her he worked with his hands, which Raymond had always said was the first thing to look for in a buyer. He walked around the Camaro twice without speaking. He opened the hood. He got underneath and looked at the frame. He started the engine and listened to it idle. He drove it up the road and back. He came and stood beside Lena in the yard. "Your grandfather built this up," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "Good man," Franklin said. "I knew of him. Did not know him personally. Should have." He looked at the car for another moment. "I will give you $38,000. Lena had done her research. She knew the range for a Z28 in this condition. She knew what Raymond's logbooks said the car was worth and what the most recent comparable sales had looked like. She had written the numbers down and looked at them every day for a week so that she would know them without having to remember them when the moment came. 42, she said. Franklin looked at her. She was 17 years old in a winter coat that had seen better days, standing in a frozen yard in Harwick, Tennessee. He looked at her the way people look at someone when they are revising an assumption they had already made. 40, he said. Done, she said. He paid in a cashier's check that she deposited at the bank in town that afternoon, standing at the teller's window in the same hoodie she had worn on the morning her stepfather's decision had arrived on the porch, and watching the number appear on the screen on the other side of the glass. The teller did not comment. She printed the receipt and slid it under the partition, and Lena folded it once and put it in her pocket beside the empty envelope that had held Raymond's letter. She drove back to the property on the county road with the window down despite the cold, because she needed the air on her face. She paid the property taxes 3 months early. She paid for the utilities to be fully restored. She put the rest in savings and started on the Mustang. The Mustang took 4 months. She worked through the winter and into the early spring, learning things Raymond had not had time to teach her, by reading the manuals he had kept in a workbench drawer, by calling Mr. Aldridge, who put her in touch with a retired mechanic in town named Walter Greer, who had worked with Raymond for 20 years and who agreed to come out twice a week to look at her progress and tell her when she was wrong and why. Walter Greer was 68 years old and spoke in the specific register of a man who expected competence and was pleasantly surprised when he found it. He did not talk to her the way people talk to teenagers. He talked to her the way Raymond had talked to her, directly, without softening, as though the information itself was the courtesy. "You have good hands," he told her one afternoon in February, watching her work the brake line. "Raymond must have shown you right." "He did," she said. "He talked about you," Walter said, "whenever he came in for parts. Always mentioned you. Said you were the one who paid attention." She kept working. She did not look up from the brake line. In March, her Uncle Craig sent a letter through a lawyer in Nashville contesting the will on grounds that Lena, as a minor, lacked the capacity to manage inherited real property and that the estate had been improperly structured to circumvent the legitimate interests of Raymond's adult children. Mr. Aldridge responded within 48 hours. His response was 17 pages long and addressed every claim with the methodical precision of a man who had anticipated the letter before it was written, because Raymond had told him to anticipate it. The claim was dismissed in April. She turned 18 in May. The morning of her birthday, she drove Raymond's truck to Mr. Aldridge's office and signed the documents that transferred the property formally and finally into her own name, without condition or representative. Mr. Aldridge shook her hand across the desk. "Your grandfather would be very pleased," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm working on the Bel Air." The Bel Air sold in August to a collector in Memphis who had been looking for a matching numbers example for 11 years and had nearly given up. He drove out to the property on a Saturday morning and stood in the barn for 40 minutes not speaking, which was the way people behaved when they were in the presence of something they had wanted for a long time and had not expected to find. The figure he offered was above the range Lena had researched. She took it without negotiating because it was fair and because the man's expression when he looked at the car had told her something about the kind of person he was, and Raymond had taught her that fairness moved in both directions. She stood in the yard and watched him drive it away in the trailer he had brought, the long white over-turquoise body disappearing around the bend in the gravel road, and she felt the same thing she had felt the afternoon the Camaro's engine first caught. Not triumph, not relief, but the quiet satisfaction of something completed correctly. She went inside and sat at the kitchen table. She had Raymond's letter in front of her, unfolded now, the creases soft from handling. She read the last paragraph one more time. "The most important thing I am leaving you is this. I believed in you when no one else was paying attention. I need you to carry that with you now that I cannot say it anymore." Her mother called that evening. It was the third time she had called since November, each call arriving with a slightly different texture. The first cautious, the second warmer, the third something that had not fully resolved into whatever it was trying to be. Lena answered. They talked for 20 minutes, which was longer than they had talked in the past 2 years combined. Her mother asked how the property was. Lena told her about the Mustang, which she had kept and was keeping. Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Dad always said you were the one who understood things," her mother said. There was something in her voice that was not quite apology and not quite explanation, but was somewhere between them, which was as close as some people could get. "He told me," Lena said. "I know." She did not say more than that. There was more to say, and it would get said, eventually, in pieces, the way large things get said between people who have hurt each other and are trying to find their way back through the damage. But not tonight. Tonight, there were things to do. After she hung up, she walked out to the barn. She turned on the lights. She had wired them properly in January, Walter supervising, herself doing the work, and stood in the space that Raymond had built and tended and kept for her without telling anyone. The Mustang sat at the back of the concrete floor, where the Bel Air had been. Dark green, long and still and waiting. She had finished the mechanical work in March and had started on the cosmetic restoration in May, working slowly because the Mustang was not going to be sold, and because of that it deserved a different kind of patience. She was going to drive it. She was going to drive it on the county roads in the summer evenings the way she had imagined driving it since the night she had pulled back the first tarp and stood in the cold and understood what her grandfather had been doing all those years in the dark and the quiet of a barn no one had thought to look inside. She walked to the car. She ran her hand along the fender, the metal cool and solid under her palm. She thought about the morning on the porch with the 2 bags. She thought about the gravel road and the cedar trees and the key cold and heavy in her pocket. She thought about Raymond on the back porch in September, looking at the barn the way people look at things they have not finished deciding about. He had been deciding, she understood now. He had been deciding whether to tell her. He had looked at the barn and thought about what was inside it and looked at her sitting beside him in the September evening and made his final calculation, that the telling was not the gift, the finding was. That the most important thing he could give her was not the knowledge of what was waiting, but the experience of going to look. She had gone to look. She had found it. She had built her year around what she found, slowly, in the cold with her hands. She was 18 years old. She had a property she owned, a truck that ran, a savings account that would carry her through school and beyond, and a 1967 Mustang Fastback in dark green that she was going to drive on the county roads in the summer evenings for as long as she wanted to. She turned off the barn lights. She walked back to the house through the May dark, across the yard Raymond had kept, past the cedar trees he had never trimmed because he liked the privacy they gave him. She went inside. She put the kettle on the stove. She sat at the kitchen table and opened her notebook to a clean page and wrote at the top, things Raymond knew that he could not say. Then she started writing them down. All of them. Everything she had learned in the year, since the morning on the porch with the 2 bags and $42 and a key that fit a lock nobody else had thought to open. She wrote for a long time. The kettle whistled. Outside, the cedar trees moved in the warm spring wind, and the gravel road ran down through the dark toward the county road and the town and the wider world, and the barn stood solid at the back of the property in the quiet, its doors closed now, its purpose completed, its secret finally, completely given. She had been left behind by the people who were supposed to carry her forward, and the person who had always seen her most clearly had left her something instead. Not rescue, not money, not an easy answer, but a locked barn and a key and the years of knowledge required to understand what she found inside it. What is left behind is never truly lost. The right hands will always find it. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way to the end. The people who stay for the whole story are the ones who understand it. If it moved you, the videos on your screen right now are waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come home. Left Behind has a story for you.